We're gonna jump right into this one, guys. We're gonna talk. We're talking strategy a lot as far as the timber. What do we create? How do you go about picking those spots? You know, using those chainsaws and getting some of that habitat on the ground, right? But sometimes we don't. I don't stop long enough on the videos. I do with the clients when I'm there with you, because it's very important. But sometimes on the videos, I keep reminding myself that sometimes I use some terminology that the viewers, maybe aren't connecting with, that my clients that I get to visit do connect with. So today we're going to jump right into this. We're going to do three bedding creations. We're going to do the top three bedding creations that we are talking about all the time, whether it's on the channel or at the properties, and what they mean, and kind of hook those terminologies to it, or those definitions to it. So the first one we're going to talk about, guys, is pockets. I've got a separate video coming down the road here on some different pocket outlooks and some really neat promotions, I guess you can do after the transition is built. But right now we're going to talk about three of them that are points that are in the handbook, and we talk about here on the channel. So pockets, to me, there's a couple of different pockets. One, after the transition is created and we know where our points of impact are, then we go in and you have the potential to start building or start looking for buck bedding areas, buck bedding pockets, places to potentially bed more mature bucks interior of a core. But remember, this is if you go back on a couple of videos, this is the first time when we're talking about building bedding that we're actually talking about building buck bedding. So make sure that you start from the outside, and before you get into these pockets that we're referring to, make sure that your food plots are laid out and designed, and you have a good start, or if not finished, the creations of your doe bedding, because this all sets up the potential to have these buck bedding pockets internal. Without these laid out, without the transition laid out, like we said, you don't know the core, the size of the core, which means that you don't know the positioning or the size of internal pockets. Where most properties go wrong, folks want to do what we all, our mind tells us to do, is we're all buck mentality, right? But we need to focus our attention on the does first, and then that leads to the pocket mentality, or the pocket builds that we can do with the internal of the properties. So pockets, what I mean by pockets, guys, these pockets, after we have the stand locations, your licking branches, this one has to, happens to be one that has a water hole on it. So what we're doing is we are laying these potential buck bedding pockets interior of the property. And what we're doing is most of these, depending on the property, depending on the species, but the rule of thumb is they're 30 to 50 feet in diameter, not 30 to 50 yards, 30 to 50 feet in diameter. So what we like to do is, when I'm walking the properties with the folks, I like to look for, in this area, we'll come down, after we get the transition built and everything is laid out, per the process, what you should be looking for, we go back and I'm looking for these situations when I'm at these stands, because the perfect world, every one of these, your tree stands, has a potential to have a pocket, a buck bedding pocket that can attach back out to it. Like we talked about before, if you start with building these guys, they're kind of floaters, if you will. They're just satellite. They're laying out in the middle of your property, and they don't connect to anything. And if there were three of us, I always use this reference, if there were three guys or three folks standing in that potential buck bedding area that you're building, and you said, okay, on the count of three, everybody go your way. You choose a path to go. All three of you would go in, there's a good percentage of the chance that three of you would go in opposite directions, right? And that's the same theory, but my theory is, internal of a property like that, they're going to find the contour, they're going to move with the wind at the side of their face, they are going to have an option, and the option is we want to build structure to give them to what we're going to talk about here. These buck bedding pockets, guys, so to finish that, we want to give them an idea on where to come into it and to leave from it with structure and edge, so they feel secure getting back out to the points of impact so you can hunt them. So this portion of it here is what we're going to talk about coming up. But the pocket itself, guys, is a 30 to 50 feet in diameter. What I do is if we can find those buck bedding, those beds that are already being used. Maybe it's a solo bed, maybe it's maybe 1 or 2 beds. Maybe we find a spot that has 1 bed and a bunch of rubs. Well, that tells me that, and you know, we're looking for pockets that the habitat is correct. As we're walking in here, you know, we're looking ahead and I'm saying, yep, look at that, the stem count is good, it's better, there's a break in the sunlight, there's a couple cedars missing, boy, there's a lot of regeneration. Maybe there's some bush honeysuckle, maybe there's some Russian or autumn olive, or maybe there's something different there. Well, you get there and there's beds around it. You know, folks often ask us, like, how in the world did you know that that was going to be a potential area that we could tie one of these pockets to? One, I'm looking at the canopy above. You can if you can look at it from above, or you can look at it on the ground and you're looking at the canopy studying that, you can find the pockets that are already in you know, letting sunlight in. You get there, there's something different on the ground. It's not a monoculture. It's not in a, you know, I've had a couple properties this year already that are overrun with, here in the state of Kentucky, overrun with cedars, you know, red cedars. You get to those areas, find the diversity, you're going to find bedding. Them are the areas that we want to try to promote. We're not trying to, like we said, you guys, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to promote the wheel. So find these pockets. If those areas are too close to the stand, you might have to bypass one of those to get to the other, but you can daisy chain them together. So this we're going to talk about this in step 2, but the pocket itself, 30 to 50 feet. You find that area, find a couple beds. If it's not there, promote it, pop a couple cedars out, let the sunlight in. And the reason that we try to find one of those areas that has a diversity, something else growing, because then you have something maybe to hinge or something to lay on the ground. If it's a real thick, nasty pocket already, well, maybe that you don't have to put you know, hinge into it. You know, not every area needs hinge cutting, but this pocket could be, you're trying to make it a pocket, so you're trying to give it diversity, but you have to leave thermal cover. It needs to be secure. So find that area, 30 to 50 feet in diameter, just put yourself in the center of it, and go all, if there is hinge cutting availability, what I do is I put myself in the center of it. We go out and maybe you can hang ribbons so you can kind of get an idea. It doesn't have to be an exact science. You can just get in the center of it, get your bearings on what 30 to 50 feet outside of you is. Go to the outside of it, hinge cut if there is stuff to hinge cut. Hinge that stuff down all to the outside. Then you have an interior to look at. Okay, now I've got a dozen trees to work with. I've got 6 cedars. There's too many cedars in here. I need to pop one of those out. I need to leave the thermal cover to make sure. Go in there, extract anything that's taller. If there's a huge oak in there, let's say, or if there's a big old maple that's cutting the sunlight off, cut them down, get them on the ground. If it's log value, well, then maybe get the log out, whatever the case is, but build those. Build that, get the structure on the ground, hinge cut it, take the survey, what's in that 5 to or that 30 to 50 foot pocket, and put it on the ground at deer level. That is a buck bedding pocket. That's the terminology when I say buck bedding pockets. The other aspect is a separate video that we're gonna do, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this because there's a lot of science to it. The other pockets are diversity pockets that we actually build on the transition, and we'll leave it at that right now, but those are where you take a transition and you elevate it to the next level. So that's the term of pockets, guys. Remember, they have to connect to something 30 to 50 feet in diameter. It's a security. It's a small area. You don't want to build it so there's a whole bunch of deer are inviting to it. You want to build it, you want to make a man cave, let's say. You're just building that little amenity so something can relate to it. A buck has a potential internal to the property to relate to, call zone. Build it bigger, you're going to invite more deer to it. The does are going to take it over. Don't get carried away with them. So that's the terminology of the pocket, guys. The second one we're going to talk about right here is the corridor. I split my definitions of a transition and a corridor. If you follow the channel, I used to get that question a lot. You know, in the industry, everybody has their own way of explaining that and talking about it. But folks were taking corridors and mixing them up with transitions, and so to me, I just started doing that years ago. And you know, some people still call that, you know, that line of travel a corridor, and that's fine. I like to separate them because then you know what you're building and where you're building it, and what is exactly the reason where you're moving deer. Okay, so what I do is the transition is the transition that moves deer 360 degrees around your property, is the main line of travel that all your amenities are on. That to me is what I call transition. So when you hear me refer to transition, that's what I mean. It's where all 360 degrees, the exterior towards the exterior property, where we're building that racetrack effect, if you will, around building that line of travel. All your amenities fall on it. That's the transition. Could be 5 feet wide, could be 20 feet wide, but that's the definition of the transition. The corridor that we're speaking of is anything that leads to bedding. A corridor relates to bedding. So when I speak of a corridor, I speak of, so we're going to do the first one, buck bedding corridor. So the buck bedding corridor leaves your transition at your point of impact off your licking branch, and that's what connects the first thing we talked about, the bedding pockets. So what these are is these are only 5 to 8 feet wide, and this could potentially be an area where this is hinged, the pocket's hinged, and then you come down through here and you can hinge this, and I'd never start at the pocket and hinge back towards the stand. What I always do is I go to the, if there is hingeable value in here, you can, if it's thick, then this gets mulched, 5 to 6 foot, 5 to 8 feet wide, so it's a mulcher, perfect. Poke a hole, but you start at the point of impact, come in, mulch that out all the way in, hit the and it's this, you need to make this a snake trail into the pocket. Well, along that way, if it's open and you lose the density, you put hinge cuts. But don't, whatever you do, don't start here at the pocket and start hinge cutting back both sides. So we're hinge cutting away from this, guys. So if there is any, it's 5 to 8 feet wide, and we're hinge cutting to the outside of that. What this is, that promotes a secure line of travel. It also promotes bedding outside the pocket. You're gaining some more habitat. But when you creep around the corner, if you do it this way, you're going to stand a chance of going too far. I always get in the stand and make sure that you look down this buck bedding corridor away from the stand, and make sure that no hinge cuttings. And usually it's about a 75-yard hole around here, and we're going to talk about this on another upcoming video. But or a pocket around your stand here, that's the danger zone, if you will. So start there, walk up, make sure if there's a hill here, put this pocket closer. Closer this can be, the more you start to make the habitat correct on there, so the better, right? So they're closer to you, but it's the contour has to permit that. If it's flat, push it back. Usually these are about 100 yards, the pockets. We touch on that. I shoot for 100 yards from the stand to build a pocket. So in other words, if you go 75 yards away from the stand that has no hinge cutting, it might only be 25 yards into the entrance of that pocket that has hinge cutting or bedding potential, bedding value. So what do you do with the rest of it? What I do is I kill cut these guys. I just kill cut them, put the debris to the outside. Everything still gets flared to the outside, but they don't. We're not promoting bedding. We're promoting structure. It's still a way to steer the deer, or it might just be, like I said, it might be mulch. You might not have to hinge any of this. It might be just a mulch trail, and those are really powerful. Then you just poke a hole and they'll follow that right out. Like I said, don't make it straight lines. If you want to make it straight coming off the transition, so you can see down it a little bit, maybe because of gun stand reasons or something like that. But when you get out here, kind of make this snake trail, makes it real personal, and they can get in and out of that. So that's the definition of the buck bedding corridor. Anything that leads to the buck bedding area is a buck bedding corridor. That's the definition, and that's kind of the terminology of how to differ the buck bedding corridor from number 3, buck cruising corridor. Same theory, has something to do with bedding, has something to do as a corridor. It's much smaller, it's 5 to 8 feet wide as well, but it's a buck cruising corridor. What the buck cruising corridor is, guys, is what I always like to do, and this is a real simple illustration, just out behind doe bedding. Some of these go in more internal, it all depends on the design of the property. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to set up a cruising corridor, 5 to 8 feet wide, that still connects to your points of impact, but goes out and around the backside, picks the backside up about 30 yards, 20-30 yards behind your doe, your doe saturated smell area where your does are your bedding. And what this does is this will promote the cruising behind your buck bedding, or your doe bedding, I'm sorry, and they're picking up the wind, they're scent checking that area as they're cruising. And we're going to explain this in a little more detail as on a separate video, But the reason that you do these, guys, is because it all ties back to the points of impact at your stand locations. And what this does with other internal buck bedding pockets, what it does is sets up the potential for your internal rut stands. Now the wind is in your favor here behind it, when that crucial, maybe you only hunt it once, maybe you hunt it twice, but that's the crucial wind direction that you need to hunt those interior core areas. So yes, there will be or could be a stand location behind them to get the wind right, but the idea is when they come out and hit this on here, the other pocket, they come out and hit the transition at the point of impacts, the other pockets that we talked about that we're going to describe in another video, this is where this plays in, because now what you're doing is you're putting deer in between each one of them, and at some point the wind is going to be, he's going to correct himself, and the wind is going to be in your favor and not in his favor, and that's when it all relates back to the point of impact. So we're going to explain how to do that on a separate video. That's the terminology, guys, about the pockets, the corridors, and creating three bedding creations that I feel that you can take your property to the next level with. Hope that helps. We'll go into the next one here. I think you guys are going to really enjoy the next video coming. We're going to take this theory and we're going to take it to the next level, and we're going to start adding we're going to start bringing the power of these properties together, now that everybody kind of knows the reasoning behind a transition, the reason that we build and we promote things the way we do, the reason that we separate transition terminology from corridor. Now we're going to go into the video here coming down the pipe here, guys. I think you guys are going to enjoy going back to pockets. So stay tuned, guys. I appreciate it. I never asked this on the channel, but I've been told I should. If you like what you see and like it, subscribe to the channel. That sure helps. I surely appreciate that, guys. That helps me out with the business, and the more it helps me, the more it helps you, the more I'm able to bring this stuff to you. So take these ones into consideration when you're building these 3 or 4 buck bedding related creations that we're speaking of. Thanks, guys.